let's turn to time preference now, which is an important aspect of the free market. People generally prefer to consume now or later. If I told you I was going to give you an ice cream cone, would you rather have the ice cream cone today or in 2 years? Well, most people would rather have it sooner. And so that's basically what time preference is. Now, there's some people who are willing to wait longer, but I doubt that there'd be a lot of people who are willing to wait 2 years for their ice cream cone. In the economy, production is divided between two types of goods. There's consumer goods. These are goods that are produced and consumed instantly, and they allow for high time preference. And there are capital goods, which will go into making consumer goods, and they're more low time preference goods. So production's always divided between these two types. Time preference is also responsible for profits and interest rates. And how does that work? Well, in the free market, you have an entrepreneur who has an idea for a business, and they have to plan it, they have to produce their good, which in some cases takes a long time. And it's not until the good is finally sold that they're able to get any money in return. So they want to have more money returned to them for having to wait so long. The consumer, on the other hand, can buy the good and have it instantly, which is really what they probably want. So they're willing to pay more because they can have it and not have to go through the whole production process. So that's how profits come about in the free market, is through this time preference. The same with interest rates. The person who loans out $1,000 doesn't have that money to spend now. So when they get it back, they want more to compensate for having to wait so long. Let's turn our attention now to the Federal Reserve, which is sometimes a confusing topic, and I know I've talked to a lot of people who have no clue what the Federal Reserve is or what it does. Well, the Fed is a private bank cartel. You see, back in the late 1800s, the banks wanted to engage in risky loan practices, but they didn't want to have responsibility if their risky loans went bust. Then their businesses would go bankrupt. So they decided they'd create the Federal Reserve to help them out, and that's basically what the Fed does now, and we've seen that especially in the last few years. The Federal Reserve also has never been fully audited, which is something that many people, including myself, are working on having done. We believe that we have the right to see what's happening to our money, what the Federal Reserve is doing. We can't see what they're doing with banks and institutions and countries overseas, which seems like something that Americans should know about. The Fed has basically two jobs, if you could say it that way. The Federal Reserve sets the interest rate, which usually they just randomly and artificially pick some number that doesn't really reflect the economy. They also control the money supply and can print money, although nowadays they do it more through electronic means, but you can visualize it as a printing press. So with the artificially low interest rate, what does this do to the economy? Well, that's basically the boom-bust cycle. When the Fed sets the interest rate too low, it makes investors think that people want more capital goods. This leads to a boom in the capital goods industry. But people haven't changed their time preference. So there's this clash here because we can't have people consuming as much as they were before and a boom in the capital goods industry. Something has to give. And what gives is this artificially inflated capital goods industry, which is what we're suffering in now. That's the whole reason why we have the recession that we're in now, is through the Federal Reserve and the government. So I'm going to take a moment and go into more details on the recession that we're in now. To understand the recession, we have to understand Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are government-sponsored entities. That means they have the government there to bail them out whenever they want. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac socialized the risk that banks took on. Basically, that means they spread it out. They spread the risk out. So this individual bank who's engaging in risky loan practices doesn't have to worry about going bankrupt if no one pays back their money. The risk has been spread out throughout all these different entities and groups, so nobody is responsible for it. And this is how Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have operated. When a home buyer wants to get a home, they give an IOU, you could say, to a bank, and the bank gives them the money. The bank then sells this IOU to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac turn around and sell a bunch of these IOUs to investors as mortgage-backed securities. Now this whole process would work if everybody pays their money back. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So that's why the boom goes bust. And because of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government's there to step in and help everybody out, or ruin the economy, you could say. The government, as you can see through this, was behind it all. Through the Federal Reserve and government actions, the government is responsible for our recession. It is not the free market. In the free market, in a truly free market without the Federal Reserve, we wouldn't have this boom-bust cycle of prosperity and then a recession, and then prosperity and then a recession. That wouldn't happen in a free market. But it's only through the government. So we need to blame them for it. Instead of having them tell us all the time on TV how it's our fault, we should turn around and tell the government it's your fault. You're the one who did this to us. Okay, the broken window fallacy. Well, what is the broken window fallacy? Well, it stems back to a story that someone wrote back in the 1800s, a Frenchman. So the story is set in a small village in France where a baker goes to his bakery one morning and discovers that his window has been broken. And all the villagers gather around because in a small village there isn't much news. The broken window is the excitement of the day. And they all are looking at this broken window, which a rock had been thrown in during the night by a mischievous boy. And one clever fellow says, well, you see, now the baker has to pay the glass maker to repair his window. Let's say that's $100 in our money. Then the glass maker has $100 he could go spend at the tailor's or somewhere else in town. And we're all going to be more prosperous because we all have a little bit of this $100 spread around. And everyone turns to him and says, well, that's a great way to look at it. Look at this mischievous boy. We should find him and give him a medal of honor for doing this and benefiting our town. In fact, why don't we have boys throw rocks in all the windows? Then we'd all be better off. Well, unfortunately, during all of this, they've neglected the baker. The baker has to pay $100. He was going to spend that on a new winter coat. But now he has $100 less and his old window. He doesn't have a coat and a window now. He's out. He has suffered. And we see this fallacy throughout the economy. We always look at what we can see. We can see the $100 given to the glassmaker, but we never look at that which isn't seen, like the baker who is out $100. Applied to our economy, there's a number of ways that we can use this example. Right now, public works and stimulus projects are very popular. This is supposed to stimulate the economy. Well, as Henry Hazlitt, the author of Economics in One Lesson, said, there is no more persistent faith in the world today than faith in government. We always think that the government can fix our problems. However, with the example of let's take a bridge that the government decides they need to build. Now, the bridge isn't really needed, but we're going to build them anyways to stimulate the economy. Well, let's say it costs them $1 million. Well, that's $1 million that the taxpayers don't have. We see the bridge that the government built, but we don't see the businesses and the prosperity that would have been created if the taxpayers had had that $1 million to spend on what they truly needed. There's also the spread the work fallacy. And unions are often guilty of this by creating all these regulations and codes on who can do this work and who can do that and so forth.